Okay, so we're still talking about the High Empire in the Roman Empire in our discussion. And we talked about Trajan last time, and now we're going to talk about the other Spanish emperor, and that is Hadrian. So, like Trajan, he's from the area that's Spain, but it's part of the Roman Empire at this time period, and he succeeds Trajan. They're not related, but they do both happen to be from Spain. He's maybe my favorite Roman emperor. That's maybe kind of a strange thing to have, I guess, but you know, I do teach art history, so he's my favorite because he's a lover of the arts. So he's a big fan of arts in terms of visual art, but also theater and music and architecture and all this kind of thing. He was also an avid hunter. He was a writer. He was an architect. He traveled a lot, not just like conquering, traveling to defeat people, but just traveling to learn, essentially. He rules for 2 decades, and there are more portraits of him than anyone, than any other emperor of Rome up to this point. So let's look at some of those portraits. Let's see. Here he is. Okay, so lots and lots of portraits of him. We'll talk about what he's most famous for next, which is a specific building that you've definitely heard of. But the other thing that he's really famous for is his beard. So if you recall, all of our emperors so far have been clean shaven, whether that is so that they look youthful or whether that is so that you can see their wrinkles and note the verism of the portraiture. They've all been clean shaven. So when Hadrian becomes the emperor, he makes beards a thing, and they remain a thing for the next 120 years. All the emperors have beards. So he's quite a personal fashion trendsetter with his facial hair. Okay, that's not what he's most famous for, though. What he's most famous for is this building. This is the Pantheon. You've heard of that, right? I wasn't overstepping and saying that you've definitely heard of it. It's one of the most famous buildings in the world. So what does Pantheon mean? Well, let's break it down. Theo means God, right? So we have deities. We have the godly part of the temple in the second half. Pan means all. Think of like a panoramic, right? It means getting the whole scene. Or if you're pansexual, you're attracted to all genders, right? So Pantheon means it's a temple for all of the gods. So up until this point, usually the temples are dedicated to one specific, like this is the temple of Jupiter, this is the temple of Minerva, or occasionally they'll have like 2 or 3 shrines to different gods, but this is literally all encompassing, like all of your catch-all for all your Roman deities. Okay, so we have a temple to all the gods. We don't have the name of the architect, which has led many historians to think that Hadrian actually was the architect of this because he was an architect in his own right. That's not known for sure, so I hesitate to say that because we don't know for sure that he was. He probably at least consulted on the design. He probably had some ideas about it. But it is possible that he was the actual architect of this. It's supposed to be kind of the orb of the earth with the dome of the heavens over it. So it's meant to look like the dome of the heavens, with a very large dome with an oculus in the center. Let's see, let me give you the actual dimensions of this thing. So it is 142 feet. So it's 142 feet high, very high dome, largest dome in the world at the point that it was built, and it's also 142 feet wide. So it's equal in height and diameter. So very, very large structure. You'll notice that in addition to the oculus, we also have a coffered ceiling. So that's that decorative kind of inlaid looking inset ceiling. At the time of its original construction, each of those coffers would have held a polished bronze disc. And the purpose for that is sort of similar to the Domus Aurea, Nero's palace, that had the gilding and the skylights so that everything kind of glowed and was gold. The purpose of that was to create all this light inside. So from the light from the oculus would bounce off of these polished bronze discs. Also, the candlelight inside the structure would bounce off of these discs, and it was meant to sort of look like the stars, the night sky with stars. Okay, so gilded bronze rosettes polished in each of these to look like the stars of the heavens and provide more light. An unusual feature of this is that it has all of its marble veneers. They all survived, so the marble is still intact. It is really interesting looking. It's not all white marble, it's all different kinds. So there's green, there's pink, there's white, there's a variety of different types of marble inside. One of the things that confuses people is that it is dedicated on the outside to Marcus Agrippa. So Marcus Agrippa was a previous ruler, and he had built a small pantheon on this site that was destroyed when Rome burned. So it had been previously destroyed, but Hadrian thought that was a great idea, this idea for a pantheon, so he constructed this really grand one that is of course quite famous and quite large in scale, and so he builds the structure on the same site and feels he should attribute it to Marcus Agrippa because it was kind of his idea. That does confuse people. So on your quiz, when I ask you who built this, don't say Marcus Agrippa, because it was not Marcus Agrippa who built this one. It was Hadrian, beard guy, okay? All right. By the way, when Hadrian takes over as emperor, he's 41 years old, and his statues do not age. So though he does have the beard instead of the youthful, clean-shaven face, his statues stay youthful. They don't age over time. So Verism, again, is out of style. Like I said, it kind of goes back and forth. Okay, so this is the largest dome in the world at the time. We talked about that. Right. So let's look at some other things from Hadrian. So this is at his grotto, his villa that has a grotto in it. So he builds this kind of grand villa outside of Rome in Tivoli. So it's a little outside, and he makes this thing. So he does design this, and we know that he has this artificial pool and grotto like a fake cave. So this is something that you see in gardens at this time. And around this pool, he has this really odd thing that has not been seen architecturally before. And that is, he has these columns, so they're Corinthian columns. Also, the Pantheon has Corinthian columns. And it has this kind of arch and lintel system, which is strange. So we have all our columns, and then between some of them we have a lintel, which is a flat connection, and some of them we have an arch, which is, like a curvilinear arched connection. And it doesn't serve any purpose. It's purely decorative. So this is strange. And no one has seen this kind of decorative, just weird little like columns as sculpture almost kind of thing that's happening. And so some historians call this the Baroque of Rome. Baroque is a movement that happens much later. When you take Art History 2 with me, we'll talk about it. But basically it's known for very kind of flamboyant and very heavily decorated kinds of architecture. So this Hadrian's use of capitals and columns and arches and things, not for structural purposes, but purely decorative so that they aren't holding any kind of function, is considered kind of a Baroque idea. So he has this very weird mesh of respect for Greek architecture and this rule breaking, because the Greeks didn't do anything like this, right? They had their orders, and they very specifically followed the rules of the order when they were building a structure. They wouldn't have anything just purely decorative like this. It's not really their job. Okay, so let's look at some influence that this sort of Roman Baroque style has elsewhere. This is a fascinating building. If you've seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you've seen this. It's in Petra in Jordan, and it's called Al-Khazni, which means the treasury or the place of treasure. It's built in the 2nd century CE, and it was built, it wasn't a treasury, that's a misnomer due to some sort of legends and myth and folklore that surround the structure, which I'll tell you about in a second. It's actually a tomb. And it's a tomb facade that's cut into the sheer rock face of the mountain, which is crazy. This whole thing is carved out of this mountain. Like Hadrian's villa, we have classical architectural elements here, but they're purely decorative. They're not following the rules of how classical Greek architecture works. So, which is something Romans break a lot of rules, but this is really breaking some of the rules. It's 130 feet high. It's 2 stories. All carved out of the rock face, which is very impressive. The inside of it is not like it is in Indiana Jones, so I'll show you the inside of it in a second, but it is not like that. The lower story kind of looks like a Greek temple, but the columns are very unevenly spaced, and the pediment only covers 4 of the 6 columns, which isn't a thing in Greek architecture. On the second story, there's kind of a temple within a temple thing happening. We have this tholos, this little kind of round, it looks like a little round temple, like inside a broken pediment kind of design. It's very strange, very atypical of Roman and definitely atypical of Greek architecture. So again, we have this influence of Hadrian and this idea of the Roman Baroque. So this kind of over-the-top, unrealistic fantasy kind of decor. This is what it reminds me of. So you remember this from second style Roman painting in our Roman painting lecture. This is a fresco, and I think that this looks very much like that. Particularly the top layer, this tholos within a broken pediment. There's a lot of legends about Al-Khazni. One is that it was built by magic by an Egyptian pharaoh who was pursuing Moses after he escaped Egypt, and that the pharaoh stored his treasure here while he was chasing Moses. Another legend claims that pirates hid their treasure in the tholos shape, the kind of urn like tholos structure on top of the second story of the facade. There are actually a bunch of bullet holes in it because people still hear this rumor that there's treasure, and so people have tried to shoot it open. It doesn't open, it's completely solid. But it was actually made as a mausoleum and crypt in the 1st century CE. So this is what the inside looks like, which is kind of beautiful stone, but very different from the big open chasm thing that with all the booby traps from Indiana Jones. So not quite like that. You can see the detail in the carving here. We have the ranking cornice and the regular cornice. In the area where the frieze would be, we just have floral and vegetation kind of decoration. So there's nothing to tell us about whose crypt or mausoleum this was. There's no narrative. There's no carvings of gods or goddesses. And then we do have Corinthian capitals here as well. Okay, so the other thing that is happening during this time period is some people are interested in moving outside of the city of Rome. It's very crowded, and one area just outside of Rome is Ostia, and we see the development of insulae. So insulae are apartment buildings, and they're kind of cool. So they have this sort of self-contained urban planning kind of layout at this time, where on the first floor you'd have the shared bathhouses, you'd also have stoas, you'd have like a market with all your different vendors you could get things from, you'd have a midwife who's kind of like your doctor for the building. So you'd have all these services in one place on the ground floor, and then apartments up above. So it's this sort of self-contained place for people who wanted to live outside of the city, largely farmers and laborers and things like this. It again is that brick-faced concrete, which we see come into fashion in the High Empire during Trajan's reign, and that continues with Hadrian as well. You can see this is a mosaic from the bathhouse, from one of the pools in the bathhouse. So really beautiful public facilities within this apartment building. Another interesting thing is we can see from the funerary reliefs of people who lived in Ostia and were cremated but had funerary reliefs nearby or were buried in sarcophagi nearby, we can see that there were lots of different kinds of people who lived here. So in funerary relief, we tend to see people's occupations being shown at this time. So this person was a vegetable vendor, okay? So in their funerary relief, there's this showing what they did as their career and their life. This other one, this was a midwife, so this is someone who would help deliver babies and give medical care and that kind of thing. So we get a lot of information from these kinds of relief carvings. Okay, next time we will talk about, we'll just talk about Marcus Aurelius really quick. Okay, we'll kind of squeeze him in here. So we have Marcus Aurelius, basically in 138 CE, Hadrian adopts Antonius Pius. He was 51 at the time he was adopted, but he adopts him as his heir. And so Antonius is the ruler for 23 years, and then we get the Antonine line from him. So this is another dynasty that starts in the High Empire. He adopts Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, and they were co-emperors together. Marcus Aurelius, you've maybe heard of, he's pretty famous. So let's take a look at him really quick, and then we'll end this lecture and get into the late empire next time. So this is he had a lot of larger than life portraits, including this one. This is an equestrian statue of him. It's bronze, it's 11 feet 6 inches high. Why did this equestrian statue survive and none of the previous ones did? Well, it's actually because of mistaken identity. So people thought that this was a statue of Constantine, who we will talk about next time, and so they didn't want to melt it down because Constantine was kind of a big deal. So, this Marcus Aurelius is an interesting figure. He writes a book called Meditations, and it's this really moving philosophical text, and he writes a lot about his personal worldview, his philosophical ideas, and various ideas about things like empathy and emotion and things like this. So in his portraits, he's always shown as this kind of world-weary guy who's kind of tired and philosophical and thinks a lot. So we get into the stage in portraiture where we have a lot of emotion being shown in the faces. So they're not necessarily ageless. It's not exactly verism. It's really just sort of this more dramatic, emotional kind of portrayals. You'll notice he still has a beard, so Hadrian's trend is still going strong. Here's another portrait of him. You see, he's just like a little tired. He looks a little tired and world weary. So the corkscrew drill that was invented to carve the Flavian hairstyles, it's used here on his hair and also to create those little kind of inset pits in each eye. I think I call them in the notes the pits of despair in each eye, because he is just sort of sad-looking fella. Another thing that we see in the High Empire, toward the end of the High Empire, when we're about to move into late Empire, is a shift from cremation to burial. So the preference up to this time had been cremation in the Roman Empire to deal with the dead. But then the shift happens where people are more interested in being buried, and everybody wants a sarcophagus, so a carved stone sarcophagus. What's strange is that instead of being personalized and showing like what we were looking at back here, like the personal lives and things like significant to the people buried in them, these are manufactured en masse in kind of like almost like a factory of stone carvers. And so they're just standard fancy sarcophagi that have different mythologies on them. One that's really popular is the story of Orestes, who's Electra's brother. He kills his mother to avenge his dad. It's this very sad, tragic Greek myth, and seems like a weird thing to want on your coffin to me, but it's very popular. So we see all of these people buried in sarcophagi that aren't personal, and so it's hard to identify the people buried within them. And it's this interesting kind of all of this like factory produced sculpture happening for funerary rites. So lots of themes are repeated on many sarcophagi. Okay, really quick, this is Yaya of Cyzius, and she was a portrait painter at this time. She's one of the few female artists from ancient Rome that we know existed, so I like to give her a little shout out. She was an encaustic painter. In encaustic painting, so in oil painting, the oil is the carrier for the pigment. In encaustic painting, wax is the carrier for the pigment. And this wax would have been applied to wood or often to marble, so painting on marble. So she was kind of an early master of encaustic painting, and her name is recorded in Pliny the Elder's Natural History. So she was kind of a big deal. Encaustic painting is very popular at this time in Egypt, which is part of the Roman Empire. We see lots of portraits like this in encaustics on wood. There's hundreds of mummy portraits like this one that have been preserved in the cemeteries, particularly in the Fayum district. And Egyptians continue their burial traditions despite being a Roman. However, these kind of stylized encaustic portrait masks were replaced with painted portraits on wood like this one. So encaustic painting becomes kind of a big deal in funerary rites as well for this more individualized practice of burial rites that's happening in Egypt, as opposed to the kind of these mass-produced coffins. By the way, Yaya would not have been blonde. That is not a very accurate depiction of what she would have looked like. Okay, next we'll talk about the late Empire.